Hello, this is Chris Ott, and this is part 7 of this series on metaphysics. And I had planned to talk about the reaction of people to contemporary theories of cosmology, how the universe came into being. But I'm going to put that off a little longer until it's understood the alternative that I'm trying to convey. So anybody who knows me and has followed me at all knows that I have a theory which I call the evolution of perception, and it has components in it that are really pretty old, that kind of but brought back and then done in a new way and inspired to a large extent by the teachings of Mayor Baba, which I've gone over quite a bit also. But it's different, okay? It's different because its purpose is different, and it's not meant to be a spiritual discourse. It's not meant to be self-help. It's meant to be a plausible way that the world that we perceive, touch and smell and everything, and as well as our thoughts and our consciousness and all that, came into existence. That's what the theory deals with. In my second book, The Evolution of Perception Re-Explained, I did go and tackled some other questions that required sort of appealing to what mystics say and so forth, but that's not the essence of the theory of the evolution of perception. The essence of it is a cosmology to explain the things I just described, and I've gone over it many times in many ways, and sometimes I do a whole talk just on some detail that pertains to it, but just about everything I talk about that pertains in some way to this theory, whether I'm talking about cause or fallacies, common fallacies about possibility or something like that. It's usually there's something that I refer to later, and I have to kind of refer back to where I had talked about it. So they laid down a lot of foundation for this idea. And so that could be, that accounts for why a lot of my older talks are kind of dull. I'm talking about things that pertain to the idea, but that are not the idea itself. And the same is true of this. Here I need to talk a little more about the subject of matter. And matter is something most people don't really think about, but in philosophy it's an important concept and has to be dealt with. Now, I'm going to say what matter is in philosophy, and then say why it's a subject of interest and why it pertains to the evolution of perception too. And I'm going to explain that while it has always seemed that it's an essential part of every cosmology, if you read contemporary cosmologies of the Big Bang and so forth, the expanding universe, the word matter comes up often. So it was matter that was compressed before the Big Bang and came out in the Big Bang and so forth. And so we need to say, well, what are we talking about? And in evolution of perception, I use the word in its more common sense as just whatever the substance or stuff is that we're talking about. So, you know, that which I can feel and stuff with my hands, like this is matter, okay? So I don't mind using the word matter like that, but that's not its meaning in metaphysics, and that's what I need to explain, and I already have, but I want to go over it because I noticed from the little bit of feedback that I've gotten, people are not very clear on what I'm talking about matter, and they don't feel very comfortable with it. So we're going to talk about it. Now, I've done 6 parts to this series, and 3 of them, really 4 of them, all had to do with this topic already. They're all dealing with matter, but now I'm going to try to get at the crux. Now, the first talk was called "We Only Perceive Our Own Ideas." That's a sort of a common sense fact that what you experience is your own personal experience that normally is considered to be in you, and in neuroscience it's considered to occur in your brain. All your thoughts and perceptions, they occur there. They don't occur outside in the world, they occur in your brain. And your brain, of course, is part of the world, but you get what I'm saying. You don't have, in contemporary neuroscience, and this is has an analog all the way back to the beginnings of philosophy, you don't have direct experience of the outer world. You only have direct experience of your own what did I say? You only perceive your own ideas. That's how they put it in the Enlightenment period in the 1700s. But now we would just say you only experience your own experience. It's the same thing. You experience your brain states, they would say. Most people would say. And but your brain states are not the same as the outer world. They're a representation of it. So I went over this quite a bit. You know, you experience visually color. That's the only thing you experience visually. Whatever you think is shape and objects and lines, those are just all actually received as color in your experience. You know, right now, this video, there looks like maybe there's lines and shapes in the shape of my head and all, but all there are pixels of color that make it up. And anybody who knows a little about HTML knows that there's actual charts that show every color that is used by those pixels. And there's only that. And when an artist like Rembrandt does a painting, of course, it looks like, you know, there's shapes and there's lines and there's different things, but the only thing on his palette is colors of paint. There isn't anything else. There's not shapes, lines, and all that. Everything is produced out of color. Color is all you experience. But color is an interpretation of frequencies of radiation. So the theory goes. So the frequency, I didn't look it up for this talk, but it's very easy to look up. You can look up the frequency of electromagnetic radiation or light that is received subjectively as red. So when you look out and you see a fire engine, you're really seeing, well, you're really perceiving your own brain states, which are an interpretation of an electrical signal produced by your body that goes down the optic nerve, and it is an interpretation of what's going on in your eyes, which is an interpretation of that electromagnetic radiation. So you're receiving, what you perceive is really just a representation of something outside. And so now all these there are other qualities are sound and smell and taste and of course tactile feeling, or hot and cold, those sensations you feel with your skin. But all those occur in the brain, or they used to say the mind. It's the same thing. Basically, it's trying to articulate the same thing. It's occurring in you. Now, two people see a fire engine. They both see it as red, but they just start going, the same process is occurring in each one of them. You know, they both have a set of eyes and an optic nerve and a brain. So anyway, once again, I'm going to use this term because it's very useful. It's called sensible qualities. Now, all these qualities like smell and taste and color and sound and tactile sensation that you feel, or hot and cold that you feel with your hands or skin or your body, all these are called sensible qualities. And by sensible, as I explained in, I think, part 1, sensible means qualities of sense. Okay, so you could say sense qualities. So let's call them sense qualities. So all you experience is sense qualities. But let's say I look and I turn and I look outside at a tree, and it can't all be sense qualities because those are all in me. So to get at what the tree is in itself, well, if I start to bracket out all those sense qualities, I go, okay, the color is not the tree, the sound is not the tree of it, the leaves rustling in the wind or whatever. The smell is not the tree. That's also occurring in your olfactory organ. Your brain produces smell. There's not really smell. There's supposedly atoms out there, and certain atomic states are experienced as this smell, and certain ones are as this smell. But there's no smell out there, really. When you pick up a little jar of perfume, there's really, supposedly, it's chemistry, and there are atoms in the air that affect the nodes in your nose, and then the organs, the nerves reach the brain, and that's interpreted as a particular olfactory sensation, a certain sensible quality, a certain smell. Okay, so if you removed all those subjective states from the tree, what do you have left? What's there? Well, that's what we call the matter. That's the matter of the tree. And so it always seemed like, well, we need to have matter to make sense of things. Now, why? Why did they come up with matter? See, I'm going to talk about how there was a philosopher, Berkeley, and he called himself an immaterialist because he said that there is no matter. And I'm going to talk about his arguments, and then we're going to get to how I'm not a Berkeleyan, but I learned a lot from Berkeley. Berkeley has about 20 arguments why matter doesn't exist. Even an argument why it's impossible to exist. Now, I'm not going to go through all that. That'll take a whole talk by itself. I have those in notes, though. I went through Berkeley's treatise on this topic, and I picked them all out. One time I asked my professor when I was starting my thesis, which was on Berkeley, I said, what is Berkeley's argument that there's no matter? And he said, why do you think it's one argument? Maybe it's several. And he knew that there were many. And I went and I realized there were a lot of arguments there. So, but one of them that's important is that it wasn't necessary. Now that's the important one I'm going to talk about today. The other one that he said was, it's not clear what we're talking about when we say matter. See, if you look in a dictionary, like an online dictionary, a simple dictionary, you will find that the definition of the word matter is substance. And then if you look up the word substance, the definition of the word is matter. So how's that telling you anything? Well, it's kind of not. Another word that's used in philosophy, and people think I'm patronizing them if I use it, so I don't generally, but it's not to be patronizing. It's another word, is stuff. There's got to be some stuff there. So why does there have to be some stuff there? Well, they're trying to solve several problems, and they include like, what are these sensible qualities, like color and smell and taste and everything? What are they qualities of? They got to be qualities of something, right? And they also want to explain why is it that when 2, 3, 4, 5, or 1,000 people look at a fire engine, they see pretty much the same thing. So there's got to be something there besides what's just in them, in their mind or in their brain. There's got to be something in the outer world. And that's where we get this idea of the external world or the outer world, which is where the real world of matter is, or the physical, the actual physical fire engine or physical tree. And all your experiences are just interpretations of it. They're representations. They stand for what it is. But because we only have sensible qualities, and that's the importance of the statement, you only perceive your own ideas. Because of that, anything that you go to imagine matter to be is based on those sensible qualities, because the only thing you can imagine is something you've perceived. And the only thing you ever perceived was things like color, sound, smell, taste that are supposedly in yourself. So, not only can you not perceive the matter or the external world or the real or the physical object, or sometimes they call it the causal outer object. They'll have all kinds of terms for this. You can't perceive it. And if you could perceive it, it wouldn't be it, because it would be sensible qualities that would be occurring in you, in your brain. And so it would, so if you can see it, it's not it. So therefore you really can't see it. It's impossible to perceive matter. Therefore it's impossible to imagine matter. Because the only things, as I said, that we can imagine are our sensible qualities. Like, we can put our color and sound and smell and taste and feel together in a certain way and imagine that, but all we've done is moved about the qualities that are subjective, that occurred in us. We haven't even touched the outer world. So the outer world is a theory. It seems it's got to exist. Now, I agree that it exists. And in the evolution of perception, as I go through it again, you'll see that there is an outer world of a sort. But this whole thing of representationalism is a little different. We're going to get into that. But, so that's the first thing I wanted to go over. Now, I've already sort of gone over that, but this is kind of a review, I guess. But what we want to get to is the fact, a few points I want to make, is that the evolution of perception goes like this. There's perception, and then perception comes up with ways of perceiving, okay? These are called the perceptual schemas, and it's not an original idea. It comes from Kant, and I'll talk about that just for a second. Maybe I'll talk about it right now. Where did this come from, this idea of ways of perceiving, and organizing your experience? This perceptual schema, which I liken to a lens through which perception begins to perceive. Well, what's this lens? It comes from Kant. And I asked a Cambridge Kant scholar to tell me if I was correct in using the analogy of a lens for what Kant called a pure intuition. The pure intuition of time, the pure intuition of space. Let me just explain that for a second. There was a debate about what time was at the time of Kant in the late 1700s. And the debate was whether space was like a physical thing, stuff or something, like we have today, by the way, where we have our bent and folded space-time. That's where time is thought of as a material stuff. They call it the fabric of space-time, bent space, folded space-time, all these things. It's very reified. And the other idea was that it was a concept. And Kant had an argument why it couldn't be a thing. And I can't remember offhand what that argument was. It was a good argument. Kant was a great philosopher. And the other was why it wasn't a concept, because it wasn't a construct of other thoughts. Usually, if you have a concept, you describe it in terms of other things. Okay? But like a black cat, you understood in terms of cats and the color black. But time wasn't like that, because the only way you could describe time was to simply refer to time. So we seem to know what time is when we stop and reflect on it, but we don't know what it is exactly, and we don't know how we know what time is. Nobody could tell you what time is. Like some people that you go, well, what is time? And they go, well, like a clock. But what they're doing is they're trying to just jar your own experience of measuring time. A clock measures time. It's not time. So it is just assumed that the person has an intuition of time. That's why he called it a pure intuition. It's not a construct, or it's not synthetic and put together from other ideas. It's something that you're born with and you don't know how it got there. So Kant had the idea that time is actually, and space, by the way, they're both ways of or organizing your experience in a coherent way that the mind could understand it. And that there is no actual time outside of the human mind, or I would say, or any mind, an animal mind, an insect mind, because they fly around in space, they must have an intuition of space. And now, this idea was had a long history afterward. It was taken for granted that Kant was right for at least 100 years, but around the turn of the 20th century, there was like a revolt, and they kind of went back to more primitive ideas where time is a stuff, and they reified it. And so contemporary cosmologies, like for instance, they ask you to imagine, you know, there's this point, and then there's compressed all this stuff, all this matter, and maybe time and space are in there too, and then they all come out, and you know, time and space are imagined as a kind of like a rubbery stuff, you know, too. It's foldable, bendable. You imagine time. It's all very ridiculous because you're imagining all these things in terms of time and space. But you don't. The person no longer reflects deeply enough to notice that, and so therefore there was actual decline in understanding in the beginning of the 20th century. However, it wasn't all for nothing. There were problems in the ideas that had evolved from Kant's thing. Now, one of the reasons there were problems in the theories that were being formed because of Kant's idea about time and space was that they assumed these intuitions were in the individual. So, therefore, imagine a man goes out alone and he lays down in the field and he looks up at the clouds and he sees, you know, there's all this space. But all that space is in him. It's totally a projection of his own mind. So everybody's in his own space. Well, this becomes a real problem after a while, and it collapses into what's called solipsism, where you're just living in your own like private world. Everybody is. And so they had this idea that the individual human mind was somehow the creator of all this that we perceive in space and time, and that just doesn't work, because you get all kinds of contradictions really quickly. And so philosophy begot more and more and more baroque and wordy to try to solve these problems. But it was all because it was assumed that these intuitions, each person had a set of these intuitions, okay? The other problem with all of the thinking up until when this thinking was abandoned, was that thinking was all steady state. Steady state, they never thought of anything evolving. See, the very title, The Evolution of Perception, gives away that this is a cosmology by evolution, a cosmology in terms of a process. But that's not how they thought in the 1800s and the 1700s. What did they think? I just talked about it in an earlier, I think the last video. People were deists. They had abandoned much of their belief in God and Christ and miracles, but they still believed that God had to have created the world in 6 days because they couldn't think of anything else that could have done it, because they didn't have processes. So there had to be something that made the world. So God had always been there, so it just went right on, and they went on accepting this idea. And gradually, beginning with Charles Darwin, who did begin to look for processes that produced portions of the world of our experience, which is animal life, they became more hopeful that they could explain everything in terms of physical processes. Well, and hence the Big Bang, not too long after Darwin, you know. Let's come up with a physical process. But the problem with these physical processes that they were coming up with is that they were all where they reified time, they reified space, and it's primitive thinking, and it is not intuitive. When you tell a person that there's backward time and time goes backwards, that's not intuitive. As a matter of fact, if you were to perceive somebody moving backward because supposedly time was going backward, there would have to be another layer of time or background of time that you're experiencing that's going forward. Otherwise, what's it going backward relative to? So it's a crazy idea. There can be no such thing as backward time, because it would presume forward time, and it's going backward in comparison to correct forward time. So time is by definition always forward, and that's how we experience time, and we do not experience backward time. I can experience my watch moving backward. Wow, now it's earlier, but it's happening in regular time, this time, which is all moving forward. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to perceive it was going backward. It's just a kooky idea. Now, this is the reason that people are either clinging to like the 6-day creation, or they're looking at really funky ideas, like we're seeded by space aliens, because the cosmology of the Big Bang and so forth is so counterintuitive that they simply, on a subconscious level, they don't reject it. They go, well, I guess there is, but they start just assuming I have to reject all my natural intuitions I was born with and start thinking all wacky, because that's how you get Nobel Prizes. You say things that don't make any sense and you'll get a Nobel Prize. I'm serious. It sounds like a joke. Right, Chris, I think you're full of it. This is all real. Okay, that's fine. Go ahead. But one day they're going to realize I was right, okay, that you can't abandon your natural intuitions. That's because we've taken a false turn, and I already explained what it was. We started reifying both time and space. Kant was right. Time and space are ways of organizing experience. Now, I'll give you some reasons that you can see this. When you have a dream, aren't you in space? And yet, where's the dream? It's supposedly happening in your brain, right? Or if you don't believe in brains, it's happening in your mind or your soul or something that's happening in you. It's not real space, but you 100% experience space. Why? Because it's conceived in terms of the geometry of space. Space geometry. Intersecting planes. Your dreams are schematized by space geometry, and therefore you find yourself in the dream moving around further, closer, from here to there, falling off a hill, and you fall. All the things that we have in space, large things, small things, growing things, moving things, require space. All that's in a dream. But where's the space? Now, I'm not arguing from an illusion that the world is a dream. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that even in your dreams you have space, because you're using the same intuition of space. And likewise, when you play a computer game, I happen to have really enjoyed Skyrim. And there's a lot of spatial stuff that goes on in Skyrim, but I love the visuals. And the visuals, you literally like pull back an arrow and let the arrow go, and it moves through space, and it moves at the correct speed, and I'm going to get into that. And it hits the target where it ought to hit. And so how is this? I'm experiencing all these things are occurring in terms of a space. And I could even get really fancy, AI goggles, and they could make it 3D. And then I'd feel just like I was in space. That wouldn't even be very hard to do. With an animation like that, you make a 3D animation and you make it do colors, and you feed the eye two different angles of the same experience, and boom, you'll even perceive that you're in space. So, but you're not. All that's really on the games used to be on CDs. Now they're on, you download them. But I still have games that are on CD. Now everything on that CD or that you download is just ones and zeros. So that math, it's not that, so the console that you're playing with, or the computer that you're using, this PC, converts those numbers into HTML color pixels and sounds, and so you get sound and picture out of those ones and zeros. But it's all programmed in there. So the point of all this is that space does not need to be in space to be space. Space is a way of organizing. So you take all that data that's on that that's in that game console, and you organize it. It's organized by the programmers in terms of three-dimensional space. Okay. Now, what? So that's what the first perceptual schemas were. They were Kant's, and I got this idea from Kant. I never thought of it. I thought, oh my God! But it doesn't just apply to space and time. If you perceive everything that you perceive physically through the natural laws, but you can't perceive anything that's not in the physical world that's not controlled by the equation for gravity. It's a schema of perception. So the laws of physical reality, the laws of nature, it occurred to me, are really laws of perception. They are themselves lenses like time and space. So then I started just laying these up. So first there's time, and then there's space, and now you have time and space. And when you go into the laws of nature, they're made of number and ratios of time and space. So you have to have time and space before you can have natural laws. But you have to have natural laws before there can be anything physical, because physical things really supervene upon the natural laws. So I have always said that there's time and space, and then supervening upon time and space, there's the natural laws, which are laws of perception, and then supervening upon them are our bodies, which are entirely describable, and the bodies of all animals and insects and everything, which evolved slowly, by the way. But they're all reducible to the laws of nature. You can describe everything in terms of number, geometry, and the laws of nature, which are all mathematical, which are all mental, by the way, which implies not the Old Testament God, but a kind of Greek logos, some kind of intelligence that is beginning to perceive, okay, and to gain consciousness in these forms that appear. The one witness behind all the individual witnesses. That's an idea right out of Advaita Vedanta, Hinduism. They have the idea that there's one witness. Brahman is the one behind every finite one. So, nothing I've really said was really that original. It came from Berkeley and Kant and Advaita Vedanta and Meher Baba. But anyway, let me say something. So if the original evolution of our bodies, let's say we're insects, okay, we're not very evolved, evolves out of in a mathematical original state. And then as we evolve mathematically definable organs of sense and nerves and so forth, and we can then take mathematical states and process them through this media, this brain and nervous system, and experience them as sensible qualities. It's because what we find when we look around is sensible qualities. But these are the sensible qualities are an interpretation of what's actually already there without them, but was on a mathematical level. So you have to picture a mathematical world. Now, and that world still obtains. It still persists. It is right now. scientists constantly say, when we look closer at everything, it turns out it's mathematical. So let's say the world is mathematical. Just imagine a mathematical world with like dinosaurs that are where the dinosaur is determined by the geometry of its body and its distance from other objects in its environment geometrically, and then it operates entirely according to natural law, and then it begins to develop a little bit of consciousness, so it starts making apparent decisions. Well, in this mathematical world with dinosaurs and insects, who are, through their nervous systems, are experiencing sensible qualities like color and sound as they are experiencing them. We do not need matter. So remember, let me say a couple things that matter seems to grant us and why we held on to the idea for so long. Well, first of all, what do we mean by something's real? Well, one of the things that we mean is that it has weight and mass. Let's get this list up here. I have this, it's a very important little list. We have mass and shape and weight and volume and solidity, okay? And size. Now, when I say something's real, I generally mean that it's solid. Now, what do I mean when I say something's solid? I mean my hand doesn't go through it. There was, see, Berkeley said there was no, to show that this is what people are trying to get at with matter, that things are solid. When a famous person disputed Berkeley's immaterialism, where he had no matter, and his name was Samuel Johnson, from a book called The Life of Samuel Johnson. He lived in 1700s, and Johnson said that there's a story in the book, an anecdote, where Johnson says that he can dispute Berkeley's theory. And the way he does it is he kicks a rock from which his foot rebounded. And he goes, I refute it thus. So see, what he's done is he's trying to show that the rock is solid and his foot didn't go through the rock. But remember, we're talking about a world of laws. Forget what Berkeley's talking about. What I'm talking about is a world of math and geometry and the laws of nature. Now, those laws include laws of atoms and the forces of attraction and repulsion. And every single atom has a repulsion that keeps it from collapsing into the other atoms, and it has also attraction so they don't all drift apart. But this doesn't allow your foot to go through a rock because of the laws of repulsion. And so all he's demonstrating is that there are natural laws, but that's not disputed. Okay? In fact, I just said they're laws of perception. So the fact that Samuel Johnson proved that you perceive laws in your experience only confirms my point. Now, there was another refutation of what were called at the time idealists, people who said there was no matter. And this was in the early 20th century, and it's by G.E. Moore, who was a very famous philosopher from Cambridge. And he gave a famous speech, and he said, I'll give you the proof of matter. And he holds up a hand like, this is my right hand, and this is my left hand. He does this in front of a class of students. So what he's showing? He's showing that a group of people perceive his hands. So that's one of the other things that is true of things that are what we call real, is that more than one person sees them. Whereas if you have a hallucination, just you do. It's private. Or if you have a dream, only you experience your dream. But when you go to a lecture and you see G. Moore holding up his hands, everybody in the room can see his hands. So all he's showing is that you all perceive these things, but of course that doesn't go against anything, at least in the evolution of perception, because we are all experiencing the same world. When you follow it through, you see that we're all experiencing the same world, a little different because we have different individual schemas. So, and you find yourself in that classroom, a world of sensible qualities, which is really mathematical qualities, which are really just ratios of time and space, which are really just schemas of perception. So you see how you start to get a world out of ex nihilo with this theory. Now, one day, when I have a little money, or a lot of money, which won't happen in my lifetime, but when somebody does, who likes the evolution of perception, this needs to be animated. This needs to be animated. How the world emerges, the appearance emerges out of these schemas. Now I want to say one more thing. The downside of the contemporary cosmology, and really all cosmologies, is this this representationalism. This idea that you're not seeing the real world. And no one has ever been able to kind of escape it. They go, well, although I can't see the real physical object, it's got to be there, and I'm just having a representation of it. You're kind of having a copy of it, and that's why it's imagined like the things that you experience. That's the problem, by the way, with the Big Bang, is it commits the historical fallacy, which is imagining the effect, the cause like its effect, reading effects into causes. You'll always do that in representationalism, because essentially you're sort of you think that you imagine the real fire engine just like the fire engine that you perceive with your eyes, but the one you see with your eyes is sensible qualities which are just in you. So you're just projecting that out there as the cause, and you just keep running into problems. That's why there's a mind-body problem. It's because of this representationalism thing, and philosophers to some extent know that, but they just don't know what to do to replace it. Representationalism. But there's another way you can look at this, and this comes from an analogy from Hinduism for Maya. Maya is this power to make you see things falsely, and reality is sort of hidden from you because of Maya, which is like a mental drag on your consciousness. And so they give the analogy of a guy is walking at dusk, and he comes upon what is really a stick in the path, but he sees it as a snake, and he gets really frightened. Okay, so he sees the stick as a snake. So that's not a copy. That's not a representation. That's a misidentification, or it's a way of seeing something. So had the guy never seen or heard of snakes before, he obviously couldn't have perceived this stick as being a snake. So what's happening is he's perceiving the stick through the lens of his idea of snakes, which he acquired from past experience. So this is the notion. This is the notion of the lens, okay? You look at a stick through a snake lens, you're going to see a snake. That's the whole concept of the evolution of perception, is you see through a lens which produces, that lens grants something to the experience. And this builds over time. As you gather experience, you start adding more and more. Well, that's more in the cultural schemas that are at the end of the process. It starts to accelerate and snowball. So I see some people of a particular kind doing some act, and next time I see one of those people, I assume they're doing that act. That's what I mean. That's like a snowballing of perceptual schemas on top of schemas on top of schemas, and your mind is getting prejudiced and further away from reality, which is infinite. And I like to quote Blake, where he says, when you stop, when you see things as they really are, they appear as they are, which is infinite. So this is different. This is seeing, I call it seeing through and seeing as, or seeing one thing as another. And in my new book, I actually start out with this, and I say, perceiving this, I give an example, I forget the example I used. You perceive this as this. And that's the whole idea. So perception is a series of perceiving in different ways. So you could call this adverbial. Different ways of perceiving produce a more and more complex object, as there are more complex ways of perceiving. Now, it sounds strange that you can get a whole world out of that, a repetition of that same process, but you can. That's what I'm always trying to convey. And you do it without representationalism. And therefore, when you get done and you've really grokked the idea, then you turn and you look out, there's a fire engine out in the yard, and you go, I'm seeing the actual fire engine. Well, how is that? What about the brain and all that? Well, that's still there. Mathematically, there is a brain and everything, and you need to have a brain, and it does interpret sound waves as sound and everything. But what you finally get with all those sensible qualities, with that particular sound, and you're at an opera, and there's a soprano on the stage, and you hear her singing, and you see her dress, and it's glittering, and the fragrances in the room, and people are smoking cigars, and you have the perfume of the people around you, and all this sensation. It's the real opera. That's the actual soprano, because that's how she is produced. She is produced. The fact that it's a sort of perceptual illusion doesn't change the fact that that is the actual end effect of the evolved perceptual illusion. Yes, you are in illusion in a way, and this is what the Vedantists try to emphasize. I don't emphasize that. But it's fact. It's a perceptual illusion produced by schemas. However, that world that you're perceiving is the actual world, the real world. There is no other. There's no hidden, invisible world. There's no invisible world and then a perceived world, like there is in materialism and idealism, by the way. This is something new. This is something different. All theories prior to this, you don't perceive the world as it is, except some kind of. There is a theory called objectivism. Ayn Rand had one. I've never read a lot about it. Doesn't sound very promising. I was told by a professor that none of those, they're called naive realism, direct realism, none of those worked. This one works because there isn't a two-world view. There's just a one-world view. The difference is that it's a world that evolved. But it's the same world that's evolving from the beginning to the end, but at the end it has all this rich nature to it, at least apparently, and sensually, it has all this rich variety and stuff. And in its original form, it's less so, less and less, until it's just the logos, which doesn't have any qualities, but it contains the capacity to imagine them all. And so your final effect is nothing, your cause is nothing like your final effect. And so you'll never run into the historical fallacy, which is reading your effect into the cause, because the cause isn't just a repeat of the effect. It's not a copy. So when I look at, there's not another fire engine that's creating your experience of the fire engine. Now, there was one other problem with matter. So what I'm trying to get at is that not only is matter and the outer world, all that, unnecessary, but because things can be explained in another way that doesn't require it, but the new way actually explains things better and more as they are. And what I mean is that, let's say that there's a matter out in the yard and I can't perceive it. It's the fire engine, the material one. Whatever that means. I can't picture it because I can only picture my sensible qualities, and it's not sensible qualities, but it's matter, which is substance, which is matter, which means substance, which means stuff. So there's some stuff that I can't see, some invisible stuff. That's called an occult entity, occult meaning hidden. How is that a theory at all? Because how does this occult stuff, this matter, produce my experience? Nobody has an answer. That's why this is a mind-body problem. How could I even begin to study how it produces it since it's invisible? Well, I can't. So therefore, it's just sort of a moot theory. It's just like, it's like a stillborn. It's dead on arrival. It's not really a theory. And I've even read that materialism isn't a theory, it's programmatic. It's a program to one day find some kind of theory by which something called matter produces our experience. Because all we have is our experience. That's the world we live in. I live in my experience, I'll die in my experience, and I'll be reborn in this experience of this illusion, or call it reality, call it whatever you want. That's not the point of the evolution of perception. It's not a, as I said, it's not a self-help program. It's about trying to be mysticism. It's trying to be consistent, though, with mysticism, and it's trying to be consistent with the observed facts of nature, which include that everything is governed by natural laws. It simply reassigns those laws from being laws of matter, which I don't even know what that is, to being laws of perception, which I'm totally intimately acquainted. I know exactly what I mean. And if I was to spill some water out of this Perrier bottle, it would spill on my lap. I would see it spill on my lap. If I see this turn too far, it'll start spilling on my lap, and it'll feel cold. How do I know all that? Because I know a little about the laws of perception after a life of living in the world of perception. That's all I have to say today. I hope some of that made sense. If you like these talks, please click like and subscribe, or and if you don't, just keep it to yourself. I enjoyed doing this. I'll see you next time in part 8. Take care. Bye-bye.